I've been sweeping floors for as long as I can remember. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept food on the table. Every morning, I'd clock in before sunrise, grab my mop bucket, and start making the school hallways shine before the first bell rang. Most people didn't notice me, and that was fine by me. I was the guy who made sure the trash bins weren't overflowing, that the hallways didn't smell like the gym locker room, and that the bathrooms were stocked with soap and paper towels. Students passed by me like I was a ghost, teachers gave me a polite nod at best, and the principal hardly remembered my name. To them, I was just the janitor, the guy with the keys who worked quietly in the background. And for years, that was the way I wanted it. But there's something about being invisible that lets you see everything. People forget you're there when you're pushing a mop. They talk about things in front of you that they wouldn't dare say otherwise. I learned the rhythm of the school, the cliques, the rivalries, the whispers of who was cheating on whom, and which teacher was secretly planning to quit at the end of the year. I never repeated anything I heard. My job wasn't to get involved, it was to keep the place running. That's what I told myself every day. I stayed in my lane, kept my head down, and minded my business. Until one night, everything changed. It started like any other late shift. The winter storm outside had most of the staff hurrying home before the roads iced over. I volunteered to lock up the building because I lived just a few blocks away and didn't mind walking. Around 7 p.m., the school was completely empty except for me and the hum of the furnace in the basement. I was sweeping the hallway outside the main office when I heard voices coming from inside. I froze. I knew for a fact that the office was supposed to be locked. I had locked it myself an hour earlier. Slowly, I stepped closer, heart pounding in my chest, and peeked through the narrow glass panel in the door. Inside, I saw the principal, Mr. Keller, sitting behind the desk with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a long coat, and looked like he didn't belong in a school building at all. They were arguing, their voices low but intense. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough to know something was wrong. Words like evidence, transfer, and payment floated through the air. Then the stranger pulled out a brown envelope, slid it across the desk, and Mr. Keller grabbed it like it was a lifeline. My stomach twisted. Whatever was happening wasn't school business. I knew I should walk away, pretend I hadn't seen anything. That's what a smart man would have done. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed quiet and listened until the man left. When the coast was clear, I unlocked the office door, pretending I had to check on the heat vents like I sometimes did during storms. That's when I noticed the envelope was gone, but the drawer of the principal's desk was slightly open. Something told me to look inside. I can't explain why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was instinct, but I slid the drawer open and found another stack of similar envelopes, all thick with cash. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. This wasn't someone's lunch money or a PTA donation. This was tens of thousands of dollars in unmarked bills. And tucked under the last envelope was a list of names, students' names, next to dates, grades, and what looked like coded notes. I shut the drawer and backed out of the office, my heart hammering like it was going to explode. I didn't know exactly what I'd just stumbled into, but it was bad. Worse than bad. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying what I had seen, the look on Mr. Keller's face, the way he grabbed that envelope like he was desperate. By morning, I had made up my mind, I was going to find out what was really happening at that school. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just going to mop up the mess, I was going to stop it from happening. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to keep acting like everything was normal, like I hadn't discovered the dirty little secret that was running under the surface of the school like a cracked sewer line. But every night after work, I stayed late, digging through files, checking security cameras, piecing together what was really happening. And slowly, the truth started to come together, and it was darker than I ever imagined. The truth didn't come to me all at once, it arrived in fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror scattered across the floor. At first, I thought it was something small, maybe a case of the principal taking bribes for good grades or letting certain kids slide by without discipline. But the more I watched, the more I realized this was bigger than grades, bigger than school politics. It was about futures, scholarships, reputations, and money that flowed far beyond the hallways I cleaned every day. It was a machine, carefully hidden in plain sight, and the man running it was the same man who shook my hand every morning and pretended not to notice the dirt on my overalls. I started with a list of names I'd seen in Keller's drawer. These weren't random kids, they were athletes, honor roll students, and children of wealthy parents. Next to their names were notes like adjusted, secured, and cleared. It didn't take me long to figure out what it meant. Keller wasn't just a principal, he was a broker of futures. He was selling grades, altering records, and pushing kids into programs they hadn't earned. Parents with money paid him to make sure their children got ahead, while kids who actually worked for their success got shoved aside. That stack of envelopes I had found was proof, and it made me sick to my stomach. I knew if I went to the police without hard evidence, Keller would crush me. He was respected, connected, and the kind of man people believed without question. I was a janitor, a shadow. Nobody would take my word against his. So, I did the only thing I could, I started collecting proof. Each night, after the school emptied, I copied files, photographed grade sheets, and downloaded backups of security footage. My hands shook every time I slid a flash drive into the computer in the main office. If I got caught, I'd lose my job, my reputation, maybe even my freedom. But I couldn't stop. Every new piece of evidence revealed a little more of the corruption that was poisoning the school. There were nights when fear almost stopped me. I'd be mopping a hallway, and I'd hear footsteps echoing when nobody was supposed to be there. Sometimes, Keller would stay late, pacing in his office, making calls I could only half hear through the vents. Once, I swear he looked at me differently, like he suspected I knew something. I forced myself to smile, to keep my head down, to be the same quiet janitor I had always been. But inside, my stomach was in knots, and I felt the walls closing in tighter each day. The breaking point came one Friday evening. I was in the teacher's lounge emptying the trash when I overheard Keller talking on the phone. His voice was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard it. He said something about removing the problem before it gets messy. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought he might be talking about me. I leaned closer, holding my breath. He mentioned a student's name, a girl who had been on the honor roll until, suddenly, her grades had started slipping. She had accused one of the teachers of changing her test scores, and now Keller was planning to deal with it. That was when I knew this wasn't just about money. Keller was destroying lives to protect his empire. I couldn't let him do it. That night, I gathered everything I had, the photos, the files, the copies of altered transcripts, even the recordings I'd made on my old flip phone. I stuffed it all into a battered backpack and walked it straight to the district attorney's office. My hands were sweating the whole time. I expected them to laugh me out of the building, to tell me to go back to my mop and bucket. But when the DA saw the stack of evidence, his expression changed. For the first time, someone was taking me seriously. The investigation moved faster than I could have imagined. Within weeks, subpoenas were issued, bank accounts were frozen, and whispers began to spread through the school. Teachers avoided eye contact with Keller, students noticed his sudden temper, and the Board of Education started asking questions he couldn't answer. I kept doing my job like nothing had changed, but inside, I felt the storm gathering. It was only a matter of time before everything exploded into the open. When the trial date was set, my name appeared on the witness list. That's when it truly hit me. I wasn't just the janitor anymore. I was the key witness in a case that could topple the most powerful man in our community. For nights, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had the strength to sit in that courtroom and tell the world what I had seen. Fear gnawed at me, but beneath it was something stronger, a sense of duty I had never felt before. All my life, people had looked right past me. But now, for the first time, I had the chance to make them see. The morning of the trial, I put on the only suit I owned, one I hadn't worn since my brother's funeral years ago. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like a janitor anymore. It looked like a man carrying the weight of truth on his shoulders. As I walked into the courthouse, heads turned. Teachers, parents, even former students were there, buzzing with curiosity and disbelief. And when I took my seat at the witness stand, I felt the silence press down on me. The judge raised his gavel, the lawyers shuffled their papers, and Keller sat across from me with a look that could have frozen fire. I gripped the edges of the wooden stand and steadied my voice. For years, I had been invisible, a ghost moving through hallways no one cared about. But in that courtroom, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the man who had seen too much, the man who carried the evidence that could bring down a king. And as I opened my mouth to speak, I knew my life, and his, would never be the same again. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. The polished wood, the high ceilings, the rows of spectators staring down at us, it all made my chest feel tight. I sat there with my hands folded, trying not to show how hard they were shaking. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Alvarez, gave me a reassuring nod before standing and addressing the judge. Her voice was calm but carried through the room like a bell. She asked me to tell the court everything I had seen. At first, the words stuck in my throat. For years, I'd been the guy who kept quiet, who stayed out of trouble and never told anyone what I saw behind closed doors. But then I remembered the girl Keller had planned to silence, the stack of envelopes stuffed with cash, and the dozens of students who never knew their futures were being bought and sold like cheap trinkets. I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. I told them about the night I saw Keller with the stranger, about the envelopes full of money, the names in the drawer, the codes, the late-night calls, and everything I had pieced together over the weeks that followed. Every detail spilled out, slow at first, then faster as the weight I'd been carrying for months began to lift. Ms. Alvarez projected photos on the screen for the jury, the grade sheets, the altered transcripts, the stacks of cash I'd photographed. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom, and I could see some of the parents in the audience pale as they recognized their children's names on the documents. When I was done, I sat back, exhausted, my heart thundering in my ears. Then Keller's lawyer stood up. He was a tall man with a smooth voice and a sharp smile, and I knew he was about to tear into me. He tried to make me look small, untrustworthy. He asked me why a janitor thought he had the right to go through a principal's desk. He pointed out that I didn't have a college degree, that I didn't even have formal training in record keeping, that I was just some man with a mop and too much curiosity. But I didn't break. I told him I had done it because no one else would. I said the truth didn't care what my job title was, that the evidence spoke for itself. Every time he tried to twist my words, Ms. Alvarez objected, and the judge sustained. I could feel the jury watching me, not with pity, but with something else, respect. For the first time in my life, people were listening to me because they had to, not because I happened to be in the room. As the trial went on, more witnesses took the stand, students who admitted their parents had paid for special tutoring that guaranteed better grades, teachers who confessed they'd been pressured by Keller to pass kids who didn't deserve it. The walls around Keller's lies were crumbling one brick at a time. I watched him sitting there at the defense table, his jaw tight, his fingers clenched around a pen. The man who once seemed untouchable now looked small, cornered, and afraid. But the most powerful moment came when Ms. Alvarez played the audio recordings I'd made. The sound of Keller's voice filled the courtroom, sharp, commanding, angry, as he talked about adjusting scores, clearing records, and keeping parents happy. Each clip hit like a hammer. By the time the last one played, you could hear a pin drop in the room. Even Keller's lawyer seemed shaken. The trial stretched on for days, and each day I came back, sat in the witness box, and told a little more of the story. When I wasn't testifying, I sat quietly on the bench, watching the machine I'd exposed slowly grind to a halt. The media showed up halfway through, cameras flashing every time I walked through the courthouse doors. Headlines started calling me the Whistleblower Janitor, which felt strange. I'd never wanted to be in the spotlight, but there I was, front-page news. By the final day of testimony, the tension was so thick you could feel it in the air. Ms. Alvarez gave her closing argument with fire in her voice, telling the jury this case wasn't just about money or grades, it was about fairness, about the kids who had been cheated out of their futures. Then Keller's lawyer gave his closing, trying to paint me as a bitter man looking for revenge, but it fell flat. The evidence was too strong, the truth too clear. When the jury went to deliberate, the entire courtroom held its breath. I sat on the hard wooden bench, staring at the floor, my stomach twisted in knots. Minutes felt like hours. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the jury filed back in. The foreman stood, his voice steady as he read the verdict, guilty on all counts. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled for quotes, parents gasped, and Keller's face turned pale as stone. I didn't cheer, didn't smile, I just sat there, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The truth was finally out. The man who had run my school like a corrupt empire was in handcuffs, led out of the courtroom as cameras flashed. And for the first time in my life, I felt like more than just the man with the mop. I was the man who had made a difference. Days after the verdict felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's life. The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters, cameras flashing in my face as they shouted questions I didn't know how to answer. How does it feel to be a hero? Did you know how big this case would get? What's next for you? I just kept my head down and said the only thing I could think of, I just did what was right. It wasn't about being a hero. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure the kids who worked hard didn't get cheated out of what they deserved. When I got back to the school, everything felt different. Teachers who barely looked at me before now stopped me in the hall to shake my hand. Students whispered when I walked by, some of them giving me nervous smiles like I was a celebrity. The superintendent called me into his office and thanked me personally for having the courage to come forward. He told me that because of my testimony, the district was overhauling its policies, auditing every grade record, and putting stricter oversight in place to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. It was strange to hear words like courage and integrity used about me. I had spent most of my life in the background, happy to let everyone else take credit for running the show. I was just the guy who cleaned up after everyone else. But now, for the first time, people were looking me in the eye, calling me by my name, treating me like I mattered. Of course, not everyone was happy to see me. Some of the parents who had paid Keller for those adjustments were furious, claiming I had ruined their kids' futures. One even confronted me in the parking lot, shouting that I had no right to meddle in things I didn't understand. But I stood my ground. I told him that what I understood was simple: cheating was wrong, no matter how much money was involved. His face turned red, and he stormed off, but I didn't flinch. I'd faced worse men than him in that courtroom. The media attention didn't die down right away. For weeks, I saw my name in newspapers and on TV. A local station even invited me to do an interview, sitting me down under bright studio lights and asking me to tell my story. My palms were sweating the whole time, but when the cameras started rolling, I spoke clearly. I talked about the kids who deserved better, about the importance of doing the right thing even when it's hard, and about how I never wanted anyone to forget that corruption can happen anywhere, even in a quiet little school. When the interview aired, people I hadn't heard from in years reached out to say they were proud of me. Inside, I was proud too, but it wasn't pride that kept me up at night. It was the weight of what had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the students who had been hurt by Keller's scheme, the ones who lost scholarships, lost spots on sports teams, lost confidence in themselves because someone in power decided their future could be sold. I wanted to do more than just expose the problem. I wanted to help fix it. So, when the district offered me a new position, not just as a janitor but as part of a newly formed ethics and oversight committee, I said yes. I still kept my keys and my mop, because that's who I was, but now I also had a seat at the table where decisions were made. I sat in meetings with administrators, looking over grade reports and making sure policies were followed. It was strange at first, sitting there in my work boots while everyone else wore suits, but after a while, I realized I belonged there just as much as anyone else. Some nights, when the building was quiet and the halls were empty, I'd walk through with my mop and think about everything that had happened. The same halls where I used to be invisible were now the place where my voice had been heard. And every time I passed the office where I had first seen Keller that winter night, I felt a strange mix of anger and gratitude. Anger that he had betrayed the trust of everyone in that school, but gratitude that I had been there to see it, to stop it before it went even further. My life was no longer just about cleaning up messes. It was about preventing them before they happened. And though the cameras eventually stopped showing up, and the headlines moved on to the next big scandal, I kept doing the work quietly, making sure the school stayed a place where kids had a fair shot. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed to know that I had done my part, and that if anyone ever tried to pull something like that again, I'd be there to catch it. As months turned into years, the storm slowly faded into memory, but its mark on me never did. People still occasionally stopped me in the grocery store or at the diner to thank me, to shake my hand, to tell me how much what I did meant to them. At first, I never knew what to say. I wasn't used to that kind of attention, but eventually I learned to nod, smile, and say, I just wanted to do what was right. And that was the truth. It wasn't about fame, or revenge, or proving anything. It was about standing up when it mattered most. I stayed on at the school, still keeping the floors clean, still unlocking doors and replacing light bulbs when they went out, but now my job was something more than maintenance. I was part of the heartbeat of the place. Teachers started coming to me when they noticed something strange, when they felt pressure from higher up, when they suspected a problem. They trusted me because they knew I wouldn't ignore it, and I wouldn't look the other way. I became the quiet guard of the hallways, not just the man with a mop. The students changed too. The kids who used to run past me like I was invisible now said hello. Some of them even stopped to talk, telling me about their college plans or asking me advice about life. I never had kids of my own, but standing there in those hallways, listening to them talk about their dreams, I felt something close to pride, like maybe, in some small way, I had given them back the chance to believe their hard work mattered. There were hard days too. Not everyone forgave or forgot. Some parents never looked me in the eye again after their part in Keller's scheme was revealed. A few kids had to repeat a grade because their records had been wiped clean of the fraudulent adjustments. It hurt to see them struggle, but I knew it was the only way forward, the only way to rebuild a foundation that had been cracked for too long. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't clean. Sometimes it leaves scars. But those scars taught me something important: truth changes people. It changed the school, it changed the district, and it changed me most of all. I learned that being invisible doesn't mean being powerless. I had always thought of myself as just a janitor, someone whose job was to fix leaks and sweep up spilled milk. But the day I chose to step out of the shadows and speak, I became something else. I became the man who held a corrupt system accountable. I became someone my younger self would have been proud of. Every year now, when graduation day rolls around, I stand at the back of the auditorium and watch the seniors walk across the stage. The lights glint off their caps and gowns, parents cheer, cameras flash, and I think about how many of those kids are there on their own merit, because they worked hard, because no one cheated for them or stole their chance. That's the quiet reward no news article can capture. Sometimes, after everyone leaves and the building is still, I walk the empty hallways and run my hand along the lockers, feeling the weight of the silence. It reminds me of that night years ago, when I first saw Keller in his office and chose not to look away. That choice changed everything. And even now, when I push my mop down the hallway and hear the squeak of the bucket wheels echoing off the tile, I smile. Because I know that I'm more than the job, more than the title on my badge. I'm the man who saw the truth, who spoke it out loud, who faced the storm and came out the other side standing tall. They used to call me just the janitor. Now, when people see me, they call me by my name. And that, to me, is worth more than anything.